The night before every first day of school is always like stressful. My mother told us we had to get up. You know, you want your outfit to be perfect, so we lay everything out. We have everything ready. We had to be to the bus stop early. And then we walked around, and there were cameras and police and, you know, for these 3 kids to get on the bus at that stop. It was a little bit daunting. When I saw the people lining the street, I got scared immediately. People were way down at the corner, so we had to come through a whole big crowd leading up to the high school. I mean, it must have been at least a mile long of people. So it's like they all wanted their spot to gawk at the kids coming in on the buses, and they were out there screaming with signs. You can't really prepare somebody for that.
In the second week of September 1974, big yellow school buses were deployed all across the city of Boston.
The symbol of desegregation, the school bus, appeared on Boston streets.
A year later, Denise Pruitt would be one of the thousands of children in one of those school buses, ferried across the city after a landmark court case forced the Boston Public School Committee to integrate the city schools.
As the nation watched, the long building wave of forced integration broke over Boston.
But for the months that followed that decision, furious anti-busing families defied the courts in every way they could.
They were not kind. They were frustrated. But more than anything else, there was that feeling in the air that these marchers were not obeying the law, and they were not going to be pushed around.
Violent resistance overflowed into the streets of Boston. And so when school started back up in the fall, these big yellow school buses slowly plowed through crowds of riotous protesters. And Denise's mother, Earline, was shocked by what she saw.
Grown men spitting towards the buses. Grown men up there with their fists and red, you know, and spewing horrible words and...
Every morning, Denise braced herself inside the school bus, fighting to stay brave, not just for herself, but for her community and her mother, Earline.
My mother would bring out Rosa Parks things and say, see, Rosa Parks got on the bus and did it, and, you know, this is Ruby Bridges, and she, you know, we knew we had to do it. We knew we had to do it.
Now, 50 years later, reporter Ivy Scott sat down with Denise and Earline to discuss this moment in their lives and how much of the story had never really been told. The complicated parts, beyond the struggle or the historical significance, the dissonance between trauma and triumph, and the intimate emotional toll that one family paid in the name of education.
What did you do next?
Came home and sat with everything crossed, you know, and prayed. God protect my babies.
I'm Jasmine Aguilera, and this is The Globe.
That's my mom.
When was this taken?
Probably around the time when you petitioned, too. I love that picture.
It could be.
Yeah, around the time when she was filing that petition. I was trying to find something.
So, Ivy, it's been 50 years since the busing crisis in Boston. Tell me how you came to talk to the Pruitts about their experience.
Yeah, so we wanted to do something big for the 50th anniversary of this landmark decision that forced the integration of the Boston public schools. And we realized that we hadn't gone back to the people who sort of started it all, the original plaintiffs, and what motivated them to bring this case in the first place and how they feel about how it all turned out. When I reached out to the Pruitt family, they were far and away the most eager to share their story. And I was amazed that after 50 years, they remembered so much of it in such vivid detail.
You really want a family history? Oh, you're getting it, whether you want it or not.
No, it's
Well, I thought that it might be fun for her to see
They
some of the pictures,
make
so
quite
we
the
talked
dynamic duo. I mean, Denise is one of 8 kids, so she's got a lot of siblings, but I think she definitely takes a lot after her mother. They both sort of embody this strong matriarch role.
They sound like very confident, self-assured people.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have sort of a a fun mother-daughter dynamic between them. Both of them are tall, imposing characters, but very friendly and sharp memories. So it is sort of fun to watch the two of them together.
Just misses the shoes.
Oh, yes, that's right. Just misses the shoes. Intentionally.
Just misses the shoes.
Intentionally. You can't see the big platform shoes. But
And this is in the home, which is in Dorchester off of Morton Street, that Denise grew up in, that all her siblings grew up in. Earline bought the house, which was sort of a big move for a single mom back then. But that is where the whole family grew up, where they experienced busing, where they were raised.
The hair, so good.
Oh, yeah, the afros back then.
I love it. And you can tell that how 70s it is because of the pants.
Yeah.
These are like the giveaway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. It's so pretty, though.
And so when I went to meet them for the first time, we sat down at their dining table in the middle of their kitchen. It's sort of the centerpiece of the kitchen, and in a way, the centerpiece of their family life.
Every hard conversation happened at the kitchen table where we all sat down because we all had a chair because we had meals together. And, she would just lay out the plan of what was happening.
So some really difficult conversations were happening around this kitchen table, going back decades, it sounds like. Given how the Pruitt story is so entwined with Boston schools' history of desegregation, could you set the table for me here? What's going on back then in the mid-1970s?
So to understand what was going on, let's rewind back to the 1950s. So 1954, Brown v. Board of Education outlawed segregation and was primarily a big deal in the South, where there were laws specifically stating blacks go here, whites go here.
All the people of the South are in favor of segregation, and Supreme Court or no Supreme Court, we are going to maintain segregated schools down in Dixie.
And so that prompted, a lot of our memories of Ruby Bridges and bus boycotts and all of these measures to undo the laws that specifically segregated blacks and whites in the South. In the North, meanwhile, there weren't laws specifically stating that blacks and whites had to be separate, but you saw a lot of what we call de facto segregation, where those things were happening anyway, even without a specific law on the books. And so, in a way, it made it almost harder to integrate because there was no specific rule saying that racism was happening, even though you saw it playing out every single day.
We have been waiting a long time, and Lord knows we're tired.
And so there was a lot of organizing going on in the North to try and raise awareness. Similar stuff, honestly, to what was going on in the South, I think just a little bit less well known. All of that culminated in 1965 with the Racial Imbalance Act that was passed in the Massachusetts State House. And that basically said that all schools needed to achieve racial parity. In Boston, which was one of the school districts sort of most affected by this law, the school committee at that time was all white, very stubborn, and did everything in their power to sort of evade, avoid, and thwart that law.
Well, certainly we shouldn't ignore any law and we should try to comply with it. But this is, as far as the elementary grades are concerned, it's a completely unworkable law.
And so it was this sort of steadily building frustration on the part of the black community that brings us to the early 1970s when this case comes about.
I really wanted to get the schools right around the neighborhood to have that type of education that the children were getting out in the suburbs. And, there were a group of people, who were going to try to do something about the school. Busing was never mentioned, but just that they were going to try to do something about getting better education for the urban schools.
It was around this time, early 1970s, that the NAACP, specifically their Legal Defense Fund, reached out to a number of community organizations, including the Freedom House, and said, hey, we're looking to file this case to desegregate the Boston public schools. Do you know anyone who would be interested? And so the Freedom House did what it does best. It reached out to the people in its network, and through her sister, Earline learned about the case and pretty much immediately was like, sign me up.
And did you guys ever have to go into the courtroom? Did you have to go to school committee meetings?
No, the only person that went to the courtroom was the woman who was the first one to sign. Not that I wouldn't have, I would have loved to gone, but I guess they kept the more, what would I say?
Vocal.
Aggressive people. Let's no, we need to keep her out of here. Because I object. I thought we would have been that type of person.
But Earline was one among 14 plaintiff families, and I reached out to all of them to try and understand what it was that they were fighting for.
Once the papers were filed, we didn't really meet anymore. We just, we were waiting and waiting. Very tense, just, waiting. Well, just like, let's put a child waiting for Christmas morning to get up and this is what the waiting is. It's just, you can't sleep, you can't really rest, you just want it to get there. And that's just how it was. I just wanted it to get there, and let's hopefully go on to brighter and better things.
So Earline just wanted better local schools for her kids in her neighborhood, not just access to a better school in general. She wanted all the schools to be equal, more or less.
Right. She wanted better schools in her neighborhood for her kids. And she specifically was not interested in busing because her 3 oldest children were already getting on a bus. They were part of a separate program called Metco that sent kids from Boston, Black kids, into predominantly white, often wealthy suburbs to receive the sort of high-quality suburban education that was available at the time. And she was tired of that. The kids had to get up early. They came home late. She wanted good education right where she lived. And then the decision came down.
A federal court order finally bore through 2 decades of resistance. Boston was found guilty of willfully creating and perpetuating a segregated school system.
Right. So Earline was one of the people that sued Boston Public Schools, and the judge in that case, Judge W. Arthur Garrity Jr., found the segregation in the school system was unconstitutional.
Yeah. And so when Judge Garrity ruled, he ordered the schools in Boston to implement a busing plan.
When the decision came down, because it wasn't what I thought I was signing up for.
I knew it was something that was historic, and that I knew that if my mother was involved in it, that it was in my best interest. And then my mother got a big award from the NAACP. I remember that. We all dressed up, and we went to a hotel, and there was dinner, and they gave her this plaque that had all of our names on it. And it was like a big to-do. And people kept coming out to interview us and talk to us.
I can't imagine Earline going through so much trouble just to have more of the same. What a weird cognitive dissonance that must be.
She was a little disappointed. On the one hand, the plaintiffs had won, technically, but on the other hand, the reality of the decision wasn't what she wanted. So she had a decision to make. She could have pulled Denise and her other kids out of the public school system. They could have gone with their older siblings. Denise had even gotten into a special exam school. She could have gone there, or they could stay the course. And that decision to take the kids out of the system is one that several of the other plaintiffs and a lot of other families in Boston did make, but not Earline.
I thought about it. But then I said, then that would be not going along with what the ruling, my signature's on there. This is what I'm suing for. And if I took them out, then it would be contrary to what I was fighting for. So that's why I went through with them. Not going to Metco, but supposedly fighting right here in our neighborhood.
Earline was committed to her principles, to her values, and to the cause. She'd put herself and her family forward to lead this fight, but she also knew it was her kids and not her who'd have to get on the bus.
We needed to do it because that's what they came up as the resolution. So we had to try it, because if we didn't try it, then we couldn't say it didn't work.
After the break, Denise describes what it was like to be bused to a majority white school in Boston 50 years ago, and the effect it had on the rest of her life. What impact it made on the relationship with her mother. Was the sacrifice worth it in the end? Hey, it's Jasmine. And if you're enjoying this episode so far, please subscribe to this feed, where we will periodically drop new and exciting bits of audio journalism. Sit with us and experience the best of the Boston Globe in your ears. We will drop new and intriguing stuff when we have it. So click that subscribe button so you never miss a drop. So, Ivy, Earline has just made this truly admirable decision to stick with the court's ruling and bus her kids to a different school. So, what happened after that for Boston?
It was a scary time for a lot of families. There was very fierce resistance from many predominantly white neighborhoods that did not want to see their kids sent out of their neighborhood into a black neighborhood and did not want to see black kids come into their neighborhood. So you saw protests all summer long. When school started that fall, particularly in South Boston, where you had black kids coming in from Roxbury, there were people throwing rocks at the buses, bottles, screaming, every slur word you can imagine. Riot police had to be called in. And so it was a really traumatic time, and I think that it was really a moment that pulled and tore a lot at the fabric of the city.
In the first days, there were isolated incidents of violence when school buses carrying black children were stoned in South Boston. For a week, there were daily confrontations between the police, students, and residents. Police escorted buses in and out of South Boston. Riot-equipped officers formed a bizarre show of force on the streets of this American city.
Did watching all of that affect Earline's decision to send Denise on the bus?
It definitely gave her some trepidation. I think she watched that all unfold with a lot of horror and a lot of fear. But when she found out that Denise and her older brother James were being sent to Hyde Park High, which was in a residential neighborhood, she felt a little bit better. Denise definitely felt safer knowing that her brother would be there to protect her, and Earline was relieved that her kids wouldn't be going to South Boston, where the most violent clashes were happening at the time. And of course, they all talked about what was going to happen at the kitchen table.
She sat us all down and she explained to us that the schools that we were going to were not giving us what she wanted us to have. And she wanted them to take her tax money and everybody else's and make our schools in our neighborhood just as good as any other school. And that didn't happen. And it turned into a whole busing situation. And then it was just on principle. We're kids. We didn't know. We were 12, 13 years old. We didn't know quite what that meant. And so I bought in completely. I was like, yep, my mother knows, and I'm 100%. And when she said, it's going to be uncomfortable, adults are going to do things, and you're going to be scared, but I want you, to be a warrior. You get on that bus, you go to school, you do what you do when you go to school. And she said, I can't tell you not to be afraid because I don't know what you're going to be facing. And we had seen the Martin Luther King civil rights movements. We had seen all of that. So we knew what those kind of things look like. I was hoping that nobody was going to hose me down.
And police routed the marchers with a barrage of tear gas.
But I was going to stand my ground. I was going to stand my ground no matter what, so. But it was scary because you never knew what was going to happen. And it just kept feeling like it got bigger and bigger. And it was like, I couldn't fathom the amount of people that I kept seeing and how far down it would go. Are they going to kill us? Like, you didn't know what people were capable of doing. And that's when my brother said, nope, you're not on the window. He came, he pushed me over. He got next to the window and put me on the inside seat, but I could still see. And I think his fear was he saw people throwing stuff at the windows and stuff, and he just didn't want me to get hurt.
And Earline didn't want them to get hurt either. She was so worried about them that she got into her car and started following the bus.
And, my brother was gripping me really tight, and I was okay. And then when he said, look out the back window, and I looked, and I was like, that station wagon is so distinctive. Like, really? My mother was back there. She thinks we don't know. We saw the car.
That's why I wanted to get on that bus with them. But they wouldn't let me because I didn't know what they were going to run into. I wish I had known. I might not have put them on the bus. I might have said, you stay off and I'm going on the bus. And I might have been packing too. So...
But you must have felt some fear, like on the inside.
Oh, at first I did, but then, like I say, once the knot was there, the anger was there, and then the fierceness comes, and stubbornness stepped in. And once the bull gets stubborn, that's where I was. We were gonna fight. I'm sorry. I guess that that it was there. The fight was there. I will not be defeated. I didn't know all of it was going to be as bad as it was to start with. But once we started, there was no turning back.
And then the bus is parked, but we couldn't get off. They made us stay on the bus. So the police were coming, and they were sort of creating like an aisle. So when the door opened, you would walk through this aisle of policemen over to where the black gate was that led into the high school. Like, it was a lot of people. And it was just, it was crazy. But to see how crazy and chaotic it was on the outside, and then to get inside, once you got beyond the metal detectors, the classrooms were quiet and serene. The students were all sitting down, doing their work. You'd walk in the room. They'd all look at you for a little bit, but then they'd get back to what they were doing. And it was like chaos, quiet. The first Friday that it felt like the police sort of let their guard down a little bit. And when we were coming to go out of the building, some boys broke through the barricade and came after some of the boys who were in the line to get on the bus. And then all of a sudden, these boys came out of nowhere. And that was really scary. I remember I was so upset when I went home and I kept telling my mother, they're going to break through the walls. They're going to get us. They're not going to get you.
We talked about it when they came home, and we sat down, and I told them, well, I guess this is the world we live in, and we all have to get used to that there are people out there who don't see us the same way we feel here. I don't know if it's fear on their part that we're going to get what they have and get more, or they can't keep us down. I don't know what the fear was, but we talked about it, and I really tried to let them know that it was fear on their part and that we weren't going to be afraid.
But it was scary. It was just a lot for, a young person to go through. There was never a day that you didn't fear something. I was afraid to go to the bathroom. I was afraid to leave out of my classroom. I was afraid to go to the lunchroom. I was afraid to go to my locker. I never had any fear when I was in a school where the kids all looked like me. At this school, and they had police at the doors and they had metal detectors. Nothing ever was easy. You know, you'd have to fight your way to be in the physics class or fight your way to be in a chemistry class because they didn't want you there. And then the teacher would give you a hard time the whole time. You know, you would show that you could do the work. And they would somehow find something to take off points just to make you feel like you didn't belong there. They'd find something.
So did you ever have a moment where you're like, Mom, I hate this. This is not working. Can I please do something else?
No, I would have never disappointed my mother that way. No, I wasn't that kind of daughter. I was going to stand up for the rights. I was going to stand up for what was right. And it didn't matter if I was uncomfortable because I knew eventually that this was going to matter to somebody else. And you always pave the way for the next generation coming. And I had a little brother. That I didn't want him to have to go through it. I would rather go through it and make things easier for him so that, you know, he can have what he needs in his neighborhood to go to school. So I was okay with that.
And so even like at that age, in that moment, you still felt hopeful that, okay, even though this is bad for me, this could make things better for me.
Yes.
It's interesting because for all that she experienced and all that she endured, Denise doesn't really have any regrets about the experience that she had with busing. Of course, it wasn't great. You know, it was hard. There were a lot of difficult times and a lot of challenges that came along with it. Something that she's talked about is, you know, she feels as though she could have gone to a better college, maybe could have had an easier path forward in life if she had gone to a school that was less tumultuous, that had fewer connotations of racism and disruption and chaos associated with it. But she worked with what she got, and she went to college, went and got multiple advanced degrees, and is really happy today working as a professor, is really proud of her career, is proud of the way that she can give back to kids that remind her of who she was at that time. And so I think for her, she sees this as an experience that made her stronger despite how difficult it is. And what's interesting about that is, although she feels almost the sense of pride and in overcoming, I think that Earline's feelings about the whole experience are a little more conflicted. Even though she was nervous and she was afraid because of what she had seen, there was also that sort of little grain of hope. Maybe it'll be different. Maybe it'll be better. And we asked if she would go back and change anything, if she had any regrets.
I guess I never apologized to them that that's not what happened. It was doing a job on me psychologically that I wanted to hurt somebody. That's the way, you know, they were hurting my children.
It's hindsight. You look back at it now, it's like we didn't really, you know, think about the danger or the trauma it will cause us, or, you know, that we were risking our future education or our careers because we were then limited by what we could do. We didn't know that. We were doing what needed to be done at the time, and then we would live the consequence after that, but we didn't think that far in advance. So when you asked my mother that, in hindsight, would you go back and change it? She stuttered a little bit because she's now seen it. And she said, and this to me, I sat there thinking about this, she said, I never apologized to my children. She said, I never apologized to my children. Do you remember when she said that? And she called me later on and said, I felt so bad sitting there talking. I said, why? Why? She said, because I never apologized to you. I said, what did you need to apologize for? For making life better for us? For being a single mom and you raised 8 kids and you did the best you could do? You did better than so many people would do. Why do you need to apologize for that?
I hear Earline and I think about my own mom and how she would push me to do things, and I would think, like, why are you forcing me to do something that's hard for some greater good? And then in time kind of understanding that and a huge part of conversations nowadays is about intergenerational trauma, the things that you must do and the things that get better with future generations, but still are a struggle in current generations.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about what you said is, people talk a lot about intergenerational trauma, but I think not enough about intergenerational strengths and intergenerational blessings. And I think that you can see the strength and the resilience that Denise received from her mom and saw in her own mom and was able to further grow in herself and then pass on to her own children. And I think that is something that you see so clearly in the Pruitt story.
Because I was brought up that way. I mean, how did my mother put it? Nobody can ever stop you. You do what you want to do, and you do the best you can at it, and you'll be all right. So that's what I tried to get. I instilled it in them, but then also tried to make sure they got it.
And she would say, "You're special. Don't let anybody lessen that for you." I mean, my mother's the type of person who didn't have china in a china cabinet. We all ate on it every day because that's how special we were. We didn't have plastic on our furniture. We didn't have anything we couldn't touch. My mother figured that we were the people who meant the most, and so everything was there for us. This is not the first time somebody's been in touch with us. They've been in touch with us at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. So it keeps coming back. It has not gone away. So the memory has come back and, you relive those years. So I think on every time the anniversary is coming up, people have reached out. I've never had anybody be this in depth. I don't think that previous people who reported on it was interested in success. It seemed to me like the narrative was these poor kids got on a bus, went to school, ruined their lives, and now they're nothing. So every time I would say, "Oh, I'm in college," or "Oh, I just got my first master's," they weren't interested. Nobody was interested. They didn't see it as, wow, this is something that you really need to be talking about, because you're so fixed on busing was a mess that you don't even see the children who came through it and what they made of their lives. They were more interested in it being a disaster and staying a disaster. My life goes on, I've moved on because I realized that I accomplished and was successful. And as much as people like to say busing wasn't, then what do you make of me? It was all about the negativity and all the bad that happened. And there was a lot of bad. Don't get me wrong. There was a lot of bad. But despite it, some of us were able to achieve in life and continue to achieve in life. And that really needs to be the narrative that, you tried to break us and you didn't. But nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that the little black girl made it.
Given the sacrifices and the triumphs that the Pruitts and all the families made to desegregate the schools, I gotta wonder, did the Pruitt family sacrifice lead to better schools today?
Not really, no. I don't think that the dream that Earline had and that a lot of these families had when they signed onto the case was really realized or came to fruition in the way that they had hoped for.
But yeah, that's how it ended up. That's how they thought it was going to help, and you see how much it helped.
Yeah.
0.
Yeah.
I think about kids now and where they go to school and how they go to school.
It still didn't make a difference.
It didn't make the difference you wanted it to make. But I do think we probably took some steps forward in terms
of the school outside of Earline's window where Denise and her brother James went to middle school. And that school closed really in no better condition than when her own kids went there. And I think that for Earline continues to be really hard. And even though, of course, her kids surmounted and overcame those challenges, the state of the schools still leaves a lot to be desired. And I think that everyone on a community level is very aware that there's a lot more work to be done.
The school up the street, if you go out into the schoolyard, I don't see how they have any outside activities. The concrete is all broken up, and I mean, it's just to me from the outside, it's not cared for. Still, nothing is being done about it.
Ivy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Beyond speaking to the plaintiffs of the 1974 case, Globe reporters took a deep look at the state of Boston schools then and now. Forced busing in Boston continued from 1974 to 1987, when a federal appeals court lifted Judge Garrity's order. But in those nearly 14 years, Boston schools did not improve much in terms of quality or integration. In 1987, after Garrity's decision was lifted and forced busing was relinquished, Boston public schools regained control of the districts and the busing system itself. Mayor Raymond Flynn divided the city into 3 school zones in a policy he called school choice. But by then, many white families just up and left the district, and Black and Latino families sent their children to their closest schools. Most of the schools in these neighborhoods continued to be second-rate. The next mayor, Mayor Thomas Menino, pulled funding for the busing system and promised to build a network of good schools that rendered busing unnecessary. But parents just didn't trust that to happen, and that plan fell apart. In 2012, a tier system was initiated, ranking schools from best to worst, Tier 1 to Tier 4. So now anyone could go to a high-quality school, if they took a bus and qualified. In 2018, a city commission study by Harvard and Northeastern found that solution failed to increase access. There just weren't enough good schools, and busing in all its shapes and forms still failed. Kids can stay in their neighborhoods and get inadequate education, or they can be bused to another, where they'll get more of the same. Today, the number of students who travel to school is astounding. 5,500 must travel more than 2 miles by school bus. Others take public transportation. 10,000 students travel to charter schools, and 3,000 students leave Boston altogether. What's left is a school district with the worst academic results in the state. Only 14% of Black Boston public school students test at grade level in math, compared to 59% of their white counterparts. Graduation and dropout rates have improved, though, so there is some hope that things will get better. Mayor Michelle Wu has a $2 billion plan to revamp the schools, but those plans have stalled, and she urges patience. This is The Globe. I'm Jasmine Aguilera. Thank you for listening. This episode was produced and sound designed by me. Additional production by Jesse Remedios, Steph Brown, and Matt Nelson. Reported by Ivy Scott and Jesse Remedios. Our editor and executive producer is Kristen Nelson. Our sound engineer is Uzair Ahmed. Our theme music is by Sam Bagala. If you like this and the journalism that powers this show, subscribe to the Boston Globe.